picture exactly fits the TV.
What fits?
It fits the TVs exactly.
Okay, that position. Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay.
It's fun.
You're going to be helping me next week.
Potentially, I'm
Okay.
hoping for at least 1 week crossover.
This is Mike's last week, I think.
Yeah, he also hasn't given me an email.
Oh, okay.
He's going to.
Okay.
I have a long, elaborate, multi-page document that explains how to do all the steps, and I'll be sending that to Stephen probably early
We're trying to do all
tomorrow.
the things. Tell me how I did it wrong.
Okay.
I think it'll be fine.
Cross our fingers. Yeah. That it all goes smoothly.
Yep. Who's next week?
Her name is Dr. Cecilia Suarez, and she is from the Agricultural Education Communication Department
So it's here at UF.
here at US. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
And she wants to do it on Zoom too.
At least we have a outsider for the first time that we have to change the technical expertise.
Well, yeah, a different department. Yeah. So she's within UF anyway. So.
Over here, so I can actually see.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, in terms of how to.
Oh,
Corey's remote, right?
She's in her office
Yeah.
because she'd rather not talk with a mask.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'd rather not talk with a mask too.
Oh, yeah, me
You know what
also.
I mean? For
Yeah.
3-hour seminars at the end
Right.
of it. I'm sorry. It's like-
I do it to be a good role model and in my classes with mature people, human footprint, and here they wear them, but in the floods class, for whatever reason, it's getting worse. It's not getting better. Even though people are emailing COVID exposure, can't make class, or I'm feeling sick. Blah, blah, blah.
what part of this is actually?
I believe if they had to put us off campus because they had this space for the meteorology students. So we were like in some random building off campus.
Oh, is that you?
I thought you were like, oh.
How are you?
Well, if next week I'm going to be technical. Make sure everything works.
Oh, is that what you're gonna do?
Oh.
You know, it's good to at least set the pattern.
Yeah. Long term, Olivia is also
I'm right
interested.
there.
Well, coordinating position, so you have someone actually interested.
Yeah, that
If
makes
you wanna like
sense.
train and have us as well.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind.
Very good at giving
Yeah, I think
good input.
And he does this to help. Also, Josh signed, good, so we have him, he starts on 17, there'll be 3 days of that fiscal way to learn about description. And then you'll have, but as of the 17th, there'll be someone here.
The rhetorical question is, Steve, isn't it?
No, it's a maximum of
Exactly.
people.
Yeah,
Thursday?
Yeah,
I knew the answer.
Yeah.
That's why I was just wondering.
but at least it's Crystal, so she's gonna
Question.
respond to questions no matter what afterwards as well, just like Alex still responds. He was just here to make t-shirt. Yeah, so you were geography, because someone wants one. I was showing off my quilt.
Oh, yeah, good.
Joanne, did you see the quilt that Heidi made me?
I did not.
Stop.
Okay.
So what are we thinking, Joanna, live versus zooming in?
I let the speakers decide.
Oh, no, I mean, in terms of representation of the audience.
We have about 10 people online right now.
Oh.
So
Like basketball, I would tackle it online.
I told them if it was on Zoom, they had the choice. So, I'll tell you that too, but
I probably just made people very nervous mentioning the way Heidi made me a quilt.
Yeah.
Probably it's gonna be rude and British.
oh my gosh, it's gorgeous. Wow, that is gorgeous.
So she contacted Pete she contacted Hannah and got all the old t-shirts and people that they've made,
Wow,
and she made me a book.
that's gorgeous.
That was my gift today.
That is gorgeous. Nicely done, Heidi.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's beautiful.
I only do that so I drink less. So they're nice.
That's what she said. She said,
Yeah.
but like, she's so nice as you will see. But like all around it, they're all. Amazing.
Oh, yes.
2:59.
Yeah.
I've never actually completed it.
Oh, I guess, yeah.
I didn't bring any printouts. Is everyone going to be okay without that? Thank you. Okay, welcome everybody. It is 3 o'clock. Hello to people live and online. Our speaker today is one of our own, Dr. Corey Matchis, who is a professor in our department. Dr. Matchis received her BS in Environmental Geosciences at Clarion University in Pennsylvania, her master's at Arizona State, and her PhD from Penn State. And she studies the spatial patterns of rain fields of tropical cyclones and has received funding from the NSF. And she teaches climatology, hurricanes, teleconnections, and atmospheric data analysis. She's won a number of teaching awards, and she has done a tremendous amount of mentoring, including mentoring through of Santa Fe College undergraduates in a program called GEOPATHS. And this is what she's going to be talking about today. Her title is Mentoring Diverse Two-Year College Students in Geoscience Research. And she has several co-authors, one of which is here, Dr. Heidi Lannon. So welcome to Corey, and you can share your screen anytime you're ready.
Okay, so you can't see it yet?
You're muted. I don't hear you.
Yeah,
I can hear her.
it says
can
that I am
Steven, we're
screen
gonna put
sharing.
you on this right away. Can you hear me, Corey?
I can hear you, yeah.
He can hear me, but, anyone technically?
Try talking now.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, thank
Checking,
you.
testing, all right?
Right, yeah, we all hear you now.
Okay, and you can see the screen. It says you are screen sharing, so I don't know what else to do. That wasn't working.
Okay.
Okay, so you can see the title slide. We're good to go?
Can see the title slide. You're good to go.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Despite the fact that we had a landfalling tropical system last night, I am not here to talk to you about hurricanes today. Instead, talking to you about an opportunity that I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to have been involved in, funded by the National Science Foundation, grants awarded to both Santa Fe College as the primary principal institute, and also the University of Florida. And also we were involved with the Orlando Science Center. And so I'm going to be presenting an overview of the program. There we go. And so that you can kind of see how there were multiple interconnected components, but then I'll focus on the research component, which is where I participated the most. The outline for this comes from the paper that we are trying to get published on the research component itself. So talking about how we designed it and implemented that program, and then the outcomes from both the faculty research mentor perspective, as well as the student perspectives, and some of the recommendations that we had once we did our leadership team reflections. And then also just at the end, some thoughts about how we were disseminating this work and sort of the program as a whole. So reading through the literature, it's pretty clear that there's a definite need to increase the workforce in the geosciences. There's a lot of really skilled, high-paying jobs available, yet the workforce is aging and there aren't enough people coming into the geosciences to replace those. And so it makes sense then that we would try to expose more students in their college years to the geosciences. They often don't even know what the geosciences are. You know, what could you study if you wanted to be a geoscientist? There's also a need to increase the diversity, as several studies we cite in the literature. And the programs that have been developed to involve students in the geosciences are more often developed at four-year universities rather than at two-year colleges where students are pursuing an associate's degree and perhaps then wanting to transfer into a four-year university. Now, these programs that exist out there can cover different topics within the geosciences. They can be a different time frames that the students can participate in. Some might be more fully funded than others. And so the benefit of a shorter sort of targeted summer research program would be you may be able to fully fund students who are participating, but they may not get that prolonged experience that a longer program could provide, where they get more of a skills gain, learn more of the terminology. However, with the longer program, you may not be able to fully fund their participation. And then also there's just other things that take over. And so you could start to have attrition from a longer program. So there's some pluses and minuses on how you design your program. It is very clear from the literature that the faculty mentors are extremely important to the success of the program, especially having sort of intrinsic motivations and previous experience with mentoring students. The three of us had experience in mentoring students at UF. And so we felt that we were good and well prepared to undertake that. And then also Heidi found a great article that actually analyzed how many hours that AA students tend to work off campus versus those that attend a traditional four-year university. And it's quite more. And so that's something that, you know, we had realized that students would need to maintain outside employment. And that's one of the reasons why our internship program was a paid internship. But even we were surprised about how many of the students worked full time and had issues with being able to fully participate in the program. So we designed our program and received funding in 2015, and we had three broad goals. So recruit, retain, and transfer the primarily underrepresented students. And so we defined that as female, ethnic minority, first generation, low income, non-traditional age, which would be over the age of 25, veterans, single parents. And then we also were looking at different experiences, how long they'd been, and how many credits they had accumulated, things like that. And then we also wanted to establish this collaboration amongst Santa Fe College, University of Florida, and the Orlando Science Center. And really try to increase the students' awareness of the geosciences and exposure to different career opportunities in the geosciences. So the overall program design, each cohort of students was in the program for a calendar year. So the first cohort began the program in 2016. So it ran 2016 through 2018. The main part, and then we did get a no-cost extension for an additional year. And the idea is that we had the funding for 6 paid summer internships each year. Although we did want to engage more students if possible, so we plan to accept at least 3 alternate students And so if somebody wasn't able to take one of the internships, we had more students available. And the idea is that we would be pairing the students with a faculty research mentor. And so we wanted to kind of assure equal numbers so that the students had a teammate to work with, as well as then to meet with the faculty research mentor. And so we started our recruitment activities in August and September, earlier in the fall. Primarily, Heidi was responsible for that with different activities. When they applied, so they filled out a formal application. Students then had to do an interview, and then the leadership team then selected the students that would accept into the program. And then we tended to have a welcome ceremony in December. And then they would begin the program in earnest then in January with the spring semester. In the spring semester, they would take a 3-credit course in physical geography that was taught by Heidi at Santa Fe. And then also she developed there a brand new seminar for the GEOPATHS program. They did participate in some of the research related activities during that seminar to kind of help with the time offset, as well as team building activities. And then they were to start their research with the UF faculty members coming to UF at least once a week for an hour meeting. And so the total research commitment was to be about 5 hours in the spring semester. Then we switch over into the summer. And in the summer, the first 6 weeks of summer, the only program activity going on was the continuation of the research with your faculty mentor. Again, the weekly meeting at UF. And then once we got to summer B, then that's when the paid internship happened. They moved down to Orlando, so they got a stipend to live, as well as a stipend for food, and then money for employment to actually work at the Orlando Science Center for the 6 weeks and develop different educational outreach activities and also do teacher development training. Then once the fall semester began, they came back to take the capstone class at Santa Fe College, again led by Heidi, where they got one of the more valuable things is the experience of completing a transfer application to a 4-year. So they actually got help with their application, which we hope would be really beneficial to them, as well as then finishing up their research activities. And then they needed to make a formal presentation of their research that showed progress each semester to a group that's outside of our program. So they did make presentations during the program and got feedback from us. And then that was to be sort of their final presentation at the end. So who did participate in this program overall? So our leadership team, so Heidi was the Santa Fe College PI and the instructor there. There was also the Santa Fe College Honors Advisor who helped provide peer mentoring to us as well as mentoring to the students. So Katie Stouffer was the UF PI and one of the research mentors. And then myself and Jasmine Judge were the other 2 UF research mentors. And then the Orlando Science Center Vice President of Visitor Experience was also part of the leadership team, although the students did work with a team of folks down there at the Orlando Science Center on their various activities. We did have a 3-member advisory board, which Joanne Massa was a part of that. And they evaluated the program each year. They conducted the student exit interviews and provided us with anonymous feedback and did an overall wrap up of the program at the end. And in years 2 and 3, we actually employed UF students as peer research mentors for the Santa Fe College students as well. And so moving on then to who we're calling participants in the project, that would be the Santa Fe College students who were enrolled towards their AA degree. So over the 3 program years, we ended up with 34 applications. 31 of those were invited to interview. They did need to be at Santa Fe for the entire year. So if they intended to graduate early, they wouldn't be qualified for the program. 29 actually came and completed an interview. We offered 27 acceptance into the program. And long story short, 20 accepted and began the program in their respective January. And what's notable about our program compared to some of the others in the literature is we were recruiting from a population that weren't necessarily planning to transfer into geoscience majors. And so only 4 of the 20 participants were enrolled in AA transfer tracks into the geosciences. And so just how did the students break down in terms of different classifications? And we went back and forth. There was only 20 to report this in numbers or percentages, but we decided to report it as a percentage. But we did a pretty good job of recruiting female participants, and also first generation. There was quite a few that it was the first generation to be in college, as well as Pell Grant recipients. That's how we determined whether we were reaching low income students or not. And there was some differences in the cohorts. So in cohort 2, we had 1 male. It was kind of interesting. Some of the feedback was, we need more males. So you can see our trip to the bat cave here. Only 1 male in that group there. And so now kind of switching into the research component of the program, again, which I was most involved, and that's the work that we're trying to get disseminated at this time. And so the goals for disseminating the results of that program. So we wanted to examine the differences between who completed the research projects and who did not complete. Were there any characteristics that really stood out? From the faculty research mentor perspective, what aspects were more successful versus not, and then also using the exit interviews from the student perspective, what was beneficial versus what was challenging. And here I have some pictures of Heidi and I disseminating the results at a couple of different conferences we've been at. And so how did we more specifically design the research component? So as you got a preview from the whole program design, the research was taking place starting in January, starting in the spring. And so there were 2 to 3 students to be paired with each faculty research mentor. Now, in the first year, we did this based on their application. Their application said, go to the websites of the research mentors and write a little essay about who you might want to work with. And then we followed that up during the interviews. And so we matched them before the program began. And that was nice because it did ensure an even number. But we wanted to be more flexible based on program feedback. So in year 2, what we did was we waited for the matching until they actually met with us and talked more about the research projects that they could pick from. And so each year, the students took the RTS bus with Heidi so that they could get transportation, because we know parking is not easy to find here and it's not cheap. But the idea is that they would come to UF once a week as they're working on the research. So she showed them the bus routes. And so they came to each one of our departments and we gave a presentation on the types of projects that we had so that they would get more information on that. And so, like I said, in years 2 and 3, then they actually had sort of a first and a second choice that they submitted, and then were paired based on those. So it was after the fact, although that caused some issues with when too many students wanted to work on one particular project, then how do we sort of parse through that? So it did make it a little bit more challenging on that end. So the mentor matching then happened in the month of February. So by March, they should be starting the research. So 5 to 10 hours a week. Some put a little bit more time in the summer. And then we did have monthly progress presentations that they gave to the whole group. So all of the students that were involved, all of the faculty mentors, and starting in year 2, we actually did a online version so that Orlando Science Center could join the presentations as well. We hadn't done that in the first year, and that was one of the remarks that we weren't as connected with Orlando. So, okay, well, we'll start doing a video conferencing to do these presentations. And so I think that really helped there. And then, as we said, during summer B, so July and the first part of August, they moved down to Orlando. So there was no research that was required during that time. Although some students might have continued looking into something or put it into the activities they were doing in Orlando, which is what we had hoped. And then in the fall, they would come back, and there weren't mandated weekly meetings at UF or progress reports, but the idea was work as much as they needed to prepare for that final presentation that was then delivered in December. And most of the students presented at the Santa Fe Honors symposium or a symposium there on campus, although a couple did present at a conference, a couple went to CDAG in our final year. So, so some of the students actually got that conference experience too, which is really cool. So one of the things we did learn through the program is we needed to be flexible. And so we did make some midstream changes, which does make it hard then to compare year to year to year experiences, because we were trying to improve those experiences. And something we didn't initially anticipate, some students didn't have a laptop computer in order to do their research when they were at home, so that they wouldn't have to come to campus all the time. And so we were able to loan laptops for this to the students to do that. Katie and I adopted the use of the Slack collaboration hub, and that really improved communication because they're able to like easily upload screenshots and comment each other. And so it's not as formal as an email would be. And so her and I found that to be really, really useful. The video conferencing, and then also we withheld $300 of their stipend as a completion bonus at the end. And Heidi can tell you all about it if you're really, really interested in what we've learned about sort of institutional rules, about funds transfer and things like this. Some of the way we had to structure our program was because of institutional policy. And so we had to make some changes with that along the way as well. So what projects could the students pick from? So the 3 research mentors had a lot of flexibility in how we designed the projects. And so we ended up with 3 very different experiences that we could offer the students. And so one of the projects was a little bit more engaging with folks in a little bit more of a social level. So they designed a survey looking at visualizations of different types of geoscience data, and then surveying on college campus, people that were coming by and seeing, you know, are the maps readable, things like that. So that involved sort of a progression over the 3 years of developing the surveys and administering the surveys and then going through the survey data. No surprise that my students worked using GIS, and we looked at hurricanes and rainfall patterns from satellites. And so I had these predefined research questions, and the students worked on different storms and added observations to our collective database. And so they got really specific instructions on the steps, and then we worked together on the analysis of the data and the comparisons between the storms. And then the third project had a field component. So they got to have a lot of hands-on equipment practice out in the field. And that was the most sort of unstructured in terms of the guidance. They were to design their own research questions that fit within the funded projects that they were helping out with in the field. And so in that particular project, students were allowed to work separately, whereas in the other 2, the student activities were paired together. So how do we get the data that inform our results? And so Heidi had provided the student demographic data and some of the reasons that the different students might have left the program. And we also had faculty reflections. We developed a rubric that we filled out at the end of spring and the end of summer. And we based it on an article we found in the literature, and we tweaked it for our particular project. We came up with 4 main categories that had to do with communication, participation in the meetings, the research-related skills, and then the progress that they were showing each time. And not every item was applicable. One of the research mentors didn't require a notebook, but I required a notebook. And so it was more about generally in the category, how much progress. So we kind of rated them as being either satisfactory or unsatisfactory. And then there was no rating for the fall because they weren't required to, make a progress update and that kind of stuff. They were just finishing up. So that's why we just evaluated in the spring and in the summer. Then there were the anonymous student exit interviews that were performed by the advisory board. And that was the only contact the students had with the advisory board. Our full interview protocol is on the Open Science Framework website. We've published a lot of the materials that we used, our rubrics, our syllabi, those types of things on that website. There were 11 questions as I combed through, looking for certain keywords like research or the names of the research mentors and the responses that seemed to have a response that was related to the research components Only one question, which was question 8, specifically asked about the research component itself. But it was nice that there were at least half of the people that responded mentioned some part of the research component as being one of the most valuable parts of the experience. So we really felt good about that. So I'll get into those results in a bit. Okay, so how did we define research completion? And so they must have made the presentation to the outside audience, and that must have shown progress over the spring and over the summer. And so we did have 2 students who were fully participating in spring, but for whatever reason was going on, they didn't really make that summer progress. And so they stayed in the program to take the capstone course and to benefit from the capstone course, but they didn't make a presentation showing that progress all along. So we did not count them as research component completion. So we had a pretty well-defined definition of that. And so we determined that 11 of the participants of the 20 to have completed the research component. And as we looked through the different reasons, because it's a multi-component program, there could be other reasons besides the research that they don't complete the research. And so 3 of the students who didn't complete, it was for lack of progress on the research, which could be caused by a number of issues that are going on. And then the other 6, it was other program components or personal issues that affected their entire participation in the program overall. And so they're from either, having some issues in the courses. To qualify for the paid internship, you needed to have passed the spring courses and make satisfactory progress in the research. And so that was a big motivator to do well in spring. But then there were different reasons that people weren't able to continue in the program. So by the time we got into the fall course, participation was a little bit lower. And then probably our lowest completion rate then was that first year. And then that's why we made a lot of midstream adjustments to that. So who did complete the research? So again, the 55% overall, about 78% of those that actually remained in the fall course. And it was actually a pretty even split amongst our different categories of students. We did slightly better in a couple of the categories, especially the African-American or Hispanic students. A higher percentage of those completed the research portion. Looking at the overall program versus the research completion. So there are some students that we lost contact with. And so we don't know what happened to them. But of those that we do have information for, so of the original 20, 14 had transferred into a 4-year program. 8 of the research completers did transfer. And a good number of them, especially the research completers, transferred to UF. And we anticipated that because they were already coming to UF. And so they're getting their questions answered about UF. They've come and transferred into departments here at UF and are still working with some of their research mentors. So 3 of them came in geography, 4 overall. One of the issues is some of the research completers, or some of those that didn't complete research, were really interested in geology. And we did not have a research project that was focused in the geological sciences. And so that could be a reason why some of those that they did successfully transfer into geoscience, but it was more in the geological sciences. That could be one reason why they didn't end up completing a research project overall. But the good news is those that have transferred into STEM majors. And so the breakdown here, so 50% in the geosciences. And then we also had a couple in different branches of engineering, biology, and ecology. So overall, with those that did transfer, whether it was geosciences or in STEM, we consider that the skills that they would have developed in working on the research would have helped them in their future careers. And as a comparable, Hurst et al. Study, they developed a summer research funded program that was for geoscience majors, and 75 of them completed, 75%. So the fact that we had 55% over a year-long program, and most of the students had not intended to transfer into geosciences in the beginning, we feel like we did a pretty comparable job there. So from the faculty research mentor perspective, in terms of how we rated the students, so overall success was good in the spring. And again, there were some motivators there that you had to do good in the spring to qualify for the paid summer internship. So that was quite a strong motivator we found in the exit interviews. 12 of the 20 had satisfactory ratings in all the categories, but interestingly, not all 12 of them ended up finishing the research. So just because they were strong early on, other things might have happened along the way, so they didn't end up completing the research. On the flip side, 5 of the 11 that did complete research got at least one unsatisfactory rating in one of those 4 categories at some point. So even though they might have struggled, they were still able to finish the project. So that is also good news. So you can see that progress really does drop off in the summer, especially in that first year. We had some issues with then folks not even completing the internship. And so we had a really reduced number of students left in the fall. And so that was really sort of the biggest outlier, is that first summer. And so we made some midstream corrections and we got a much higher overall sort of performance satisfactory rating after that. And so another thing that might be related to how we structured the program that led to a summer drop off too, especially in that first summer, is we didn't have any other summer program activities summer A. So in the spring, they had been immersed in coursework and the research, all these team building activities going on. And then summer A, it's just doing research. And so a lot of them upped their work hours in the summer. One of somebody took study abroad, some people traveled, and some of them took a lot of summer courses at Santa Fe College too. And so summer just ended up being a time where a lot of other things came in, and we weren't paying them to participate in the research. And so that's something that we would consider in the future there. In terms of mentor or project specific results, those that worked together in pairs or in threesomes on a more structured project tended to have better success and made more progress on the research. Those that spent more time in person with their both peer mentors and faculty research mentors tended to have more success. So especially this idea of communication, we found that was a huge key. Those that posted more to the collaboration hub were able to troubleshoot, were able to make more progress. Those that did not maintain a research notebook, even though they were supposed to, not surprisingly, they had trouble making progress. And then also another thing that we noticed too was with the mentor matching. So 5 students actually changed their mentor preference after the UF visit. So that suggested it was good for us to change our approach in that. But it ended up, because the choices were uneven, that 5 of 20 students ended up not receiving their first choice of project or mentor. And there was one student who did not pick a project after the UF visit. So that seems to indicate that they weren't all that interested in the 3 projects available. So of the 6 total, 4 of the 6 did not complete research. So that could have been this idea of a mismatch with a project or a mentor, a part of why that didn't happen. We started to become more flexible in our last year, and we allowed a student to switch mid-program. Because she really wanted to work on a certain area. We allowed her to switch into that, and then she did complete. So that was a success story. And as I mentioned before, another issue was just 3 students were very, very interested in geology, and we didn't have a well-defined geological research project that they could work on. So some of the student reflections, there was a nice section we wrote up for the article with some different quotes. But the idea that they got to work not just with one mentor, but they got to meet and interact with all of the different mentors and learn about all the different projects at our monthly group meetings was beneficial. We had a very interesting occurrence for year 2, thinking about that they did or did not want to be in the geosciences. And you will tell which mentor these comments are about. One said, I really wanted to work in the hurricane project. I got to do that project, and I ended up doing more. Where somebody else's reaction was, I don't want to do anything with weather and climate. I figured that out after this. And so, but we count that as positive. So they got an experience and they decided, okay, at least they can check that one off, and they can look for other things that interest them. Some of the challenges they reported was that it was just unexpected how much time they'd have to commit to the research. And reflecting on that, the 2-year college and AA programs don't often have a strong research culture. And so that makes sense. They really didn't understand the gravity of what they might have been signing up for, even though their commitment form said you will spend 5 hours a week. Really thinking about the logistics of that and how that would work into their schedules, and the need to commute. The one project required field work, so that was even more of a commute for them. And so we won't read through all these different quotes, but I went back through and did a keyword search on things like job and commute and work. And I found a lot of quotes that talked about, again, the challenge of fitting in the research with the amount of work they're doing. So with question 8 here, these are 3 different people that talked about having to work a lot. So this person had to work 70 hours a week in the summer. So yeah, they're just not going to have time. Now, remember, these are anonymous, so we don't know which of these students completed the research or got matched with the project they wanted. There's no way to know that. But just that it was a frequent mention in the exit interviews, that they had to work, there was a lot of hours, and it was really hard to fit, especially the research component in with all the other program components going on. So some of the recommendations that we ended up with, we held the faculty presentations in January, but, why couldn't we have gone to Santa Fe College during recruitment and given presentations about our research? Because we could have potentially reached more students, even if they didn't apply to the program. Another idea was, how about a mini internship where during the spring, instead of having to commit to a certain project, maybe you get to sample a little bit and you spend maybe 2 weeks sampling each of the projects available. And then you write an essay that describes what you learned and what you might want to more fully commit to. And then over the summer and into the fall, you could more do a deep dive with a project that you're really, really interested in. We had some suggestions. If they were to do an internship more locally, then we wouldn't have to pay them a housing stipend, and we could potentially spread those funds there to help offset the hours they would need to do a summer research program. As faculty mentors, we all had different experiences, but what about taking training together as the whole leadership team to better understand the mindsets that the students are coming from, and to be better prepared then to help them be more successful as a cohesive unit. And then also just to have more flexibility with the faculty research mentors. The way we designed it, we were sort of locked in for the 3 years. But actually, it would be better if we designed a program where the research sort of leader side wasn't one of the mentors. And then the mentors might rotate from year to year so that there would be different projects available. And that might be something that allows a little bit more flexibility overall. And so the research articles that are coming out, so the one that Katie led on the exit interviews themselves actually is published now and has a DOI. Jasmine led the article about the whole program, and so we got some good feedback on that. It's in revision. I led the one on the research, and we submitted it in August 2019. And just because I knew this was going to be for a lot of students out there thinking about publishing your work, it is not always a quick process, but the key is to be persistent. So, we finished up in December 2018. There was a no-cost extension, but it didn't involve the research component as traditionally designed. So we started to write up our manuscript. We submitted it. 4 months later, we get some feedback. We resubmit, and there's radio silence. I'm like going on to the website, right, where you submit the portal and putting in messages. Well, it turns out over the 2 years, there's been 3 different editors. And so nobody was responding to the portal. And Katie asked somebody who knew somebody, and we were trying to figure out who we can get a response from. There's at least 2 different associate editors that have reviewed, and they all have actually the longest comments of everybody. There's been at least 3 different reviewers. So I think there's been 1 person, and she signed her name to her last review to let us know that she's glad that we stuck with it, that has given us positive feedback all along. So we're finally in a accept with minor revision, and we finally, 2 years after the initial submission, we're waiting for feedback on that. But it is a team effort. I would not have been able to write this because this is way outside my comfort zone in writing about weather and climate research. Having that persistence mindset, even with disseminating results, is really important. And just to see the variety of people that were on their staff. So this is not about naming and shaming. It's just about, there were a lot of different people who could have been handling the manuscript. This happens. And so stick with it. It's not always straightforward, but it'll be worth it in the end to get your research published, and especially to disseminate the results of a program like this. We definitely decided to keep with it. And just a few kind of things to think about in closing with our leadership team's informal reflection. Heidi had developed a really nice presentation about a spectrum of sort of structured and unstructured parts of the program, and formal and informal parts of the program. And some students respond differently to different combinations of those. So I'm a very structured and formal person, not surprising. And so the way I structured my research project was a lot more formal and structured. And so for students that were more in that mindset, it likely benefited them, but maybe students who weren't in that mindset might have benefited from a more unstructured project where they could explore more at their own pace. And as well as some of the other activities that we had in the program as well. Institutional policies, I mean, it constrains how the stipends could be administered. It constrained the questions we were allowed to ask at the interviews, and the way that we could construct the application all had to be approved. And so some of the things that we would have liked to ask about skill sets that could have been better used for matching, we weren't able to do at that interview time. We're not able to draw a concrete conclusion and say, okay, if you were going to design a research program, you should do it like this. We changed it up to better accommodate the students. All the students had different needs, different experiences, and it's a pretty small sample size. So unfortunately, we weren't able to say, like, here's our one best recommendation. We had a variety of recommendations, which number one is to be flexible. If you really want to meet the student needs and help the students, you got to be flexible. I'm not the most flexible person, so that is something that I learned to reflect on through this process. And this idea of a growth mindset. And, you know, did students enter with a growth mindset? And so that they were able then to overcome obstacles and troubleshoot problems and continue to grow and continue to learn. And students don't always know their own limitations, even when you specifically ask them. A funny story, so by year 3, my presentation actually included screenshots of what they'd be working on. And I sent to the students the Excel spreadsheet that had the database that we were going to add to. And I said, open the spreadsheet, take a look at it. If this is scary, don't pick my project. And I ended up having a student who didn't know how to open Excel. So I thought that I was communicating very clearly. If you don't know how to use Excel, you're going to need to learn. So luckily, again, with the peer mentoring, Heidi was able to help us out with that and come up with a plan. And they took some training in Excel, and then they were able to continue and complete the project. But here I was thinking I was very clear in what we're going to do, but the students didn't always understand the time they're going to have to put into learning that. And so that I needed to check myself with that. And again, some of the examples I've given is the peer mentoring among the leadership team was very important. Invaluable. We talked every other week, if not more frequently, amongst the research mentors. And even through this whole process of writing the articles up, we're still meeting regularly. And it's just been really, really important and really good experience to be part of. And just me reflecting on my own experiences as a student myself. Just wanted to, again, thank my mentors over the past 25 years. And just, I'm working to pay it forward. I tell my students, the best thing you can do to thank somebody is to put it into what you're doing and pay it forward. And, you know, we're all still works in progress, but it was great to be a part of this program. So I'll go ahead and conclude there.
Thank you. Questions for Corey?
So I have one. This is Esther. Or maybe two as in the form of one. I'm not sure. I just wanted to clarify, like, were these students paid a monthly stipend like an REU or not?
Okay. So in the first year, they got a lump sum that they were supposed to go to Santa Fe and show their student ID and pick up like right before they went to Orlando. And that caused some issues because not everybody then completed the internship, but they were already paid for it. So Santa Fe allowed us to be a little bit more flexible. And then the other years, and Heidi, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were given their living stipend up front so that they could search for housing with it and put a deposit down. And then they were given a more spread out stipend while they were down there. And then we withheld $300 as a completion bonus at the end as a little enticement for them to actually complete the program as well. So it went differently in the different years. But what they were specifically being paid for was not research with the faculty mentors. It was for their living expenses and food, and then working at the Orlando Science Center, where they developed projects and interacted with the public, and did sort of teacher training materials for K through 12 teachers as well. So yeah, so not quite like an REU.
Yeah, but it sounds fairly similar, including that completion, you know, the last paycheck, as it were, is after completion. The reason I ask is I'm just thinking that given that, especially, you know, in the community college, some are non-traditional and need to draw a regular income, and that seemingly was a big impediment. As do you know whether there are funding streams that can actually offer competitive salaries for people that are doing these types of research experiences?
I don't have a lot of experience with just sort of like even an REU. I haven't been involved in one of those yet. So, I mean, one of our suggestions was if we had a lot of the stipend was so that they could live in Orlando because it was 2 hours away. So there's no way they're going to commute back and forth every day because they work there every day as like a full-time job. But if we could foster some relationships with local internships, then they wouldn't need to, you know, pay to move somewhere else. And they can also be more part of the community, and they could also, you know, have their family connections, not have to move away for, you know, for that. And then if we had even the same amount of money, we could actually pay it maybe all over the entire summer so that they could get some money for participating in the research as well, to help more supplement their income.
All right, thanks.
Yes, Dr. Corey. So I would like to know, is there a methodology, by the way? I would like to know if there is a monitoring and evaluation system to follow up on these students in a few years' time, just to see how they are doing, just to know if they have dropped along the line, or if, you know, if they are still in the geosciences fields.
So Heidi has maintained contact with quite a number of the students. And so she does send out, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Heidi, but, you know, requests for updates. Some of the students are, you know, still in contact with her. Some of that came to UF. We've seen them on campus. So even, you know, one of the research mentors say, hey, I saw so-and-so, and they ended up majoring biology. We saw them walking on campus. And so, yeah, some of them are still around. Heidi is able to get data on things like completion through like the Santa Fe system, who transferred, who completed their AA degree, things like that. But there were some students who basically dropped out of college, or just never replied to Heidi's emails for updates. And so we don't really have a formal way of tracking them. You know, we've done some online searches. Are they on LinkedIn? Things like that. So I mean, I think we've kept in contact with quite a few of them, or at least Heidi has. But yeah, there wasn't a sort of a formal, it wasn't a requirement that they keep reporting to us. There wasn't really a carrot, right, for that. So.
Okay, thank you. But do you think it's necessary to like design a formal thing? Do you think it's relevant to like your work, or like just to have data later in the future?
Yeah, it would to track a more long-term trajectory. That it would be more helpful, especially if you have a program that you're able to keep in place for longer, so that you have more and more cohorts of students. And as you make those programmatic changes, are they sort of being more beneficial over time, things like that. I definitely think it could be helpful. It's sort of not my area of expertise in terms of like how you could potentially design something and get people to commit to reporting back to. But yeah, I mean, a lot of them, I'd say almost all the students had a really great relationship with Heidi. And so they keep in touch with her. And that is really important part of this too, is just sort of that social interaction too. A lot of the students actually stay in contact with each other. We've learned a group of them went up to see the eclipse a couple of years ago after the program ended, but they were such good friends that they drove up and saw the eclipse together. So there really was a good sort of team building aspect to it that worked as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, questions from the live audience? Megan, you had one earlier?
Yeah, Dr. Mott, this is Megan. So just to be clear, you said that you recruited from a population that they weren't planning on transferring into the geosciences. Is that correct?
Yeah, that wasn't a prerequisite, right, to apply. Any major or planned transfer major, I should say, was welcome. We didn't sort of say, oh, only if you are going to go into geosciences can you apply to our program. So we had quite the range of majors, like exercise science was one of the majors. So yeah, it was quite the range.
And I'm just wondering, did you have anybody who wasn't initially like interested in STEM? Did you kind of just pick them out of, or get to pick them off out of their AA major at the community college level? Or was that kind of an outlier that didn't happen?
I only sort of have like sort of the numbers of the different counts. I do recall there was one student, just remembering their interview, it really stuck out. They really weren't sure what they wanted to do. And the way they phrased it is they were looking for an opportunity, but they didn't know what. They didn't know what they wanted to do. So we were like, okay, well, you can have an opportunity with us and you can try this out. And it ended up being somebody that eventually down the road did actually enter a geosciences program. So it actually ended up being a success. Heidi knows who we're talking about. But yeah, so we got students who said, look, I am biology, I am pre-med. And we had at least two students who they were going to be a meteorologist. That was it. Although UF doesn't have a meteorology program. So one of them transferred into aerospace engineering. And one of them went to FIU and did more sort of atmospheric stuff down there. So there were some that came in that I want geology or I want meteorology. And then ended up going through to that. So whether our program helped convince them that was good for them, it's hard to say, because again, we kept all the exit interviews were anonymous, so it's really hard to match that up. But yeah, some of them have gone on to biology or ecology, and different majors like that.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a few questions. Oh wait, Sam does. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Matthews, this is Samantha Timbers. I just wanted to ask, over the course of this program, were there any like specific qualities or like just general like themes that you saw in these students that like basically, I guess, compared to students that enter right into a 4-year research university program, were there any defining characteristics of people in this 2-year program that really benefited the research process?
That's a good question. I mean, so I ended up working with 8 of the students, and they were all so different. Just in terms of like things like attention to detail, or knowing what to put in their research notebook, or, you know, not being afraid to ask a question. You know, some were eager and some weren't as eager. You know, it's just their ability to sort of to troubleshoot and want to persist with something that even though they're struggling. Whereas others were like, all right, well, I'm not liking this so much. And others were like, I want this experience. And maybe it was because they wanted the paid internship, I have to admit. But it's really hard to say there's any sort of one sort of, I don't want to say magic profile of somebody who's going to be successful or different. I mean, for me personally, the students that I had worked with before here at UF, usually they're in my class. So I already had sort of a, you know, working relationship with them, as you will. So they might have come to office hours, they expressed interest in doing research in, you know, weather or climate. And so that connection through taking the class was already there. And this was different because they hadn't had a class with me and they hadn't had a prerequisite, right, in, you know, any kind of weather research. So they took physical geography with Heidi and they got a little bit of GIS exposure there. But that was really could have been their first foray into even just sort of physical geography. So that was something I actually found quite different. Was I'm used to working with more senior level students who have had coursework before, and to work with students who might not have had geoscience specific coursework in their background, and trying to like troubleshoot and problem solve and mentor and get sort of a vocabulary with certain terminology that you teach them in the intro courses. So that was actually something that I had to sort of recalculate in my own mind. So that was actually a really good experience for me. But yeah, to answer your question, I don't really have a great answer to that.
I was wondering if there's anything from your like non-traditional background, I suppose, that really lended like to the uniqueness of the program, or had any ideas and stuff like that. So, thank you.
Okay, well, one last question from Christopher.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Maches. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm curious to know more about the Orlando Science Center and what was the feedback, our impression, both from the faculty, mentors, and from the student participants about that component of the program.
So the students who ended up going to the internship and completing it, I think generally really valued that experience. Some of them, or at least one person I think said, I learned I didn't want to work with children. But most of them really enjoyed kind of transferring, like designing a project. So they were given a small budget where they could like procure materials and put together like a little science experiment for hands-on at the Science Center. There was the Science on the Sphere. And that's what I had sort of designed my rainfall analysis project, with this idea that if they were going to show the results of like a rainfall analysis on the Science on the Sphere, like the hurricanes moving across the globe and producing all this rain and making landfall. And so because I've seen the Science on the Sphere at AMS, American Meteorological Society conferences. And so I've seen one up close and personal, and they show all the weather data and the year's worth of satellite loops and all this kind of cool stuff. And so some of the students were going to get to do some presentation on Science on a Sphere. And so they were going to get exposure to different outreach modalities and activities when they were down there. And so it was just I think overall a very different experience from what they might have been working like a sort of a normal job, where they might have had just more freedom to explore and create. And then also then getting that public interaction as well. So I think most of the students really valued that. So in the beginning, it might have been a little bit more, oh, I want the paid internship, because to a lot of them, the money they got was a large sum of money. But I think at the end, it wasn't so much about that, but they really got an interesting experience, and it really helped them think about the outreach, the types of questions the public might ask you, because they were there working with the kids in Dr. Dare's lab and, you know, playing with like soil temperature probes and things like that. So it was, I think, a really rewarding experience for them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Corey. I'm gonna wrap things up because it's time or past time, almost 4 o'clock. Thanks everyone for we'll see you next week in Colloquium. Our speaker is Dr. Cecilia Suarez, who is going to be talking about anti-racist teaching. So look forward to that.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Corey.
Bye.